Hi, my name is John Mondelli. I'm a voice actor. I've worked on things like Adam Ruins Everything and The History Channel, Clash Royale, hurrah! And I do all my voice work exclusively from right here in my home studio. Now, I've been doing voice work for over 10 years, but last year my wife and I had to move into a new house. And so since I had to relocate the studio anyway into a new place, it seemed like this was the perfect time to finally construct a vocal isolation booth. Because believe it or not, even though I've always had a home studio, I've never had a vocal booth. It's always just been an acoustically treated space. So this summer, I finally got the materials and came up with this design and built my own studio booth. So I wanted to make a video to show you guys how the booth turned out, how it all works, and why I chose the design that I did. So without further ado, here's a look at my home voiceover studio. Sorry, that was really cheesy. Let's just start the video. The first thing I want to mention is this is the absolute cleanest sounding recording space I have ever had. And there were two things that I really focused on in order to achieve that. Number one was trying to get this room as quiet and as soundproof as possible. Number two was thoroughly acoustically treating the whole space from top to bottom to try and eliminate any acoustic reflections in here at all and just make it a completely dampened vocal isolation booth. And by the way, this is just how I chose to make my booth. I designed it based around my studio needs, the size of the room that I was putting the studio in, and the amount of noise there is in my neighborhood. But if you want to make your own booth, that's awesome, and do it however works best for you. So I think my biggest challenge early on was soundproofing, because when I first moved in here, I could hear everything going on outside through the windows. The windows were closed, but I guess the glass was just thin enough. It was not blocking out. I could hear neighbors across the street having a conversation. That's how much sound was coming in from outside. And so my biggest concerns were obviously, number one, any sounds coming in from outside would be heard on my recording, but two, you know, I'm a voice actor, I record for video games, I do a lot of screaming.
No time to mourn no matter how much the sting the day extracts, it's all what it costs, everything is giant!
So I didn't want to disturb the neighbors either. So I did a lot of research and I actually found some really helpful information on a YouTube video saying that you could use fiberboard sheathing as a soundproofing agent. Now, soundproofing and acoustic treatment are two completely different things. A lot of people mix that up. These acoustic tiles in here are not soundproofing. This is acoustic treatment. What this does is gets rid of the echo in the room. Soundproofing is the process of actually using materials to block sound from getting through so that the sounds outside don't come in and the sounds that I make in here don't get out.
You must really feel it in your heart and soul.
Ooh, is that molasses?
So what I decided to do was put 2 layers of fiberboard sheathing on all the windows in the room. I'd put one layer right up against the glass and then another layer that was a little larger on the outer edges of the window, and that had weather stripping all along the edges. The weather stripping went right up against the wall between the fiberboard and the wall, and what it did was created a nice tight seal to help keep the sound out, and immediately we noticed a difference. I actually had my wife go outside and we tested it. She stood outside and I came in the studio here and screamed as loud as I possibly could. And when I went to check, she goes, "Are you screaming?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm screaming as loud as I can." She could not hear a thing. So that worked immensely for soundproofing the room. The next step, of course, was building a booth. So I actually made my booth 8 feet wide, which is pretty big, but I wanted to accommodate my desk, my keyboard, my studio monitors, and be able to have plenty of elbow room. It's also 6 feet deep, so I'm not cramped right up against the keyboard, and it's 7 feet tall, which allows for me to stand comfortably if I want to stand while I perform, because a lot of times I like to do that. So I just wanted a nice open space without feeling like I was confined all day long, and I really like having this kind of breathing room. The booth itself is constructed from plywood, which most people use for making their booths. Some people actually make walls with studs and insulation for soundproofing, but since I already have the fiberboard on the windows, I didn't really need a lot more extra soundproofing, but one thing I did do was add a layer of fiberboard sheathing on each wall. So every wall in here has 1 layer of plywood, and then on the inside, 1 layer of fiberboard. The walls of the booth have your standard acoustic tiles on them. I just bought a big 96 pack of 2-inch thick tiles and covered the walls in them. I also got bass traps for the corners. I've never had those before, but because of the size of the booth, I was worried that it potentially could sound a little boxy in here, so I figured those would help. truth be told, I don't know if they make that big of a difference, but I also just really like the way they look. And that's something I think is important to mention. If you want to make your own studio, but you don't want to spend the money on acoustic tiles, you don't have to. There are tons of materials you can use for acoustic treatment. A lot of things you might even have lying around your own house, like heavy blankets. You know, when I first started out working professionally as a voice actor, I didn't have acoustic tiles, but I had some heavy blankets and curtains, and I just hung them all around the room. I draped them over mic stands and set them up to treat the space as best I could. And I was able to book paid work. So really, you can use a lot of In fact, when I first moved into this house, at the time, I didn't have the money to build the booth yet. And until I did, to make do, I got some PVC pipes and some moving blankets, and I built a structure that acoustically treated the space just fine. Now, I wanted the booth, but I was able to continue working with what I had. So I just wanted to put that out there and just say, you know, it really doesn't matter what your space looks like. I like having a nice looking space, but I was able to work for years with just heavy blankets treating the room acoustically. In fact, this booth actually uses moving blankets as well. Now, you can't see them right now because I designed the booth to look good on camera, but the one thing the camera never sees is the fourth wall. This booth is actually only 3 walls. It's the back wall and the 2 side walls, but the fourth wall does not exist. What I did was I designed it to where I could hang a moving blanket, and the moving blanket absorbs the sound waves going that way, but it's also something that I can lift and open up, and that way I'm also less boxed in. So if I want to open the room up, I can just lift the moving blanket out of the way. And the ceiling of this booth is also a moving blanket. I have a couple of wood beams going across to support it, but I didn't need to make a ceiling or put acoustic tiles up there because the camera's never going to be looking up there. So what I did was used a moving blanket. And on the floor in here, I put a nice dense rug to also help with the acoustics. So between the rug on the floor, the moving blankets behind and above me, and the acoustic tiles all around, this entire space is completely acoustically treated from top to bottom. So the sound in here is great. I can back away from the microphone and yell and not worry about echo in the room, which I did in my previous studio. I used to have to get really close to the mic, and I would turn the gain way down because if I backed away from the mic, then you'd get that echo, even though the room was acoustically treated to the best of my ability then. This room, it's amazing. I can back away. No echo. Another important aspect in the design of this booth and keeping it as quiet as possible was making sure that the computer is not here in the booth with me. And that's because computers make noise. They have fans. Obviously, they're necessary to keep the computer cool, but when the fan kicks on, the microphones are so sensitive they pick it up and it'll ruin your take. So thankfully, this room conveniently had a closet right over here next to the booth. So what I did was I put the computer in the closet, ran the cables out into the booth, and then shut the door. So that way, anytime I'm recording, the computer is in another area behind a closed door, and that makes a tremendous difference in any noise of the computer coming through. Now, this next issue is something that I have been dealing with for years, probably as long as I have been doing voiceover, and I know a lot of other voice actors have as well, but I can't seem to find much information on the subject, and I'm not sure why, because you'd think everyone would want to do this, and that is keeping your booth from becoming a hot box. It gets so hot when you're recording because, especially if you're acting, you're performing, your body is generating heat, your equipment is generating heat, and within a few minutes, you are just pouring sweat in your own booth, and it becomes very, very uncomfortable. I have dealt with that for a long time, and especially when, the summers come along and you're just kind of baking in your own juices, So when I built the booth, I'm like, I need to make sure I have a way that at least the AC gets in here. So this is what's worked for me in this booth. Now, I know everybody's situation is going to be different. Every house is different. But here's what I was able to do with the space I have. In this room, there's an air vent on the floor that's right behind the booth. So I got a $10 air deflector on Amazon. That's just a little thing you put over the AC vent and it directs the air one way. So I put that back there and it blows the air on the floor toward the booth. The moving blankets that hang behind me don't go all the way to the floor, so there's a gap down there allowing for some ventilation and for some cool air to come in. Also, because the rest of the room outside the booth is also acoustically treated, a lot of times I can just get rid of the blankets entirely and just leave it open and allow for some ventilation in the room, which for me was a really important part of the design of this studio. It just keeps it so much cooler.
There you have it, laddie, a delicious frozen haggis.
The other thing that made a huge difference on the temperature in here was actually just switching to a different kind of light bulb in the studio. Now, I like a brightly lit workspace. Just like I don't want to sit in a tiny, cramped booth all day, I don't want to sit in the dark all day. I like to have light. And I used to always use these. These are GE Reveal HD light, and they're really nice as far as light goes. They're white, they're clean, they're very bright. But just like most light bulbs, they produce a lot of heat. And for so long, I was using these things and just dealing with it. And when I built the booth, I liked it, but it was still kind of warm in here. And so I researched and decided I would switch over to these. These are LED bulbs. This brand is LE. I found these on Amazon. And honestly, these things have been amazing. They're actually brighter and whiter than the GE bulbs. And I can leave them on all day long, and I can still touch the bulb with my bare hands, and they're not even hot. They're just slightly warm. It's amazing. So switching over to these bright LED lights has been incredible. It's actually a little cool in here right now. And I've got 4 light bulbs on in here, and I've got the moving blanket drop behind me. So if anyone has lights in their studio and that's been an issue, I highly recommend switching over to using some kind of a LED bulb and find one that does not produce heat, because that has been incredible. Well, there it is. That is a look at my home studio voiceover isolation booth. I hope you guys found this informative. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. And if you'd like to see a video of me talking about my equipment, like my microphones, interface, and all that, I'd be happy to do one of those as well. So, this is John Mondelli saying have a wonderful day. I gotta stop doing that. I'll see you guys later.